Thank you so much for joining us. Those of you coming, the attendees are still going up actually, so I may repeat a couple of things you've heard before as we just go through the kind of house rules of today. This is the first event of this type that Albert is running virtually, so hopefully everything will go according to plan. We've obviously done all of our technical rehearsals, etc. But I really would like to use the fact that this is a virtual seminar to be able to have more of a discursive approach, because if we were in a room right now, we would only be able to hear from all of you by walking around with a microphone, and the opportunities for that is quite limited. So this offers us a great opportunity to use the fact that we've got some incredible speakers to really stimulate the debate and also some expertise, obviously, and then use that as a way to try and help us kind of engage with you and hear what's really on your mind. We've had 47 questions sent to us in advance of this talk this morning. We're not going to be able to get through them all, but there's a few things that are very repeating themes, which I've already given to our speakers today, and they will try and build them into their topics. But without any further ado, I really want to just I'd say a big thank you to our sponsors. So Albert is supported by Green Tomato Cars, by Good Energy, and also Sargent Disc. And just before we kick off with the proceedings, we have a message from Lawrence Sargent, Dr. Lawrence Sargent, who is going to just welcome us and set the scene for what we're about to do.
So hello and welcome, I'm Lawrence Sargent, and for those of you who don't know us, Sargent Disc is a carbon neutral provider of payroll, accounting and digital production office tools. We're proud to be partners of BAFTA Albert and have supported Albert for a number of years. The current pandemic is an example of how our industry can deliver change quickly and effectively when it's necessary. And we're helping by providing the digital tools to enable that transformation. Climate change has the potential to be equally catastrophic if not addressed effectively. And our industry has the ability to change itself and to help change the wider economy by delivering content that educates and encourages decision makers. Ensuring the sustainability of the screen industries is fundamental to us, with climate change baked into our own strategic planning. And Sargent Disc is a rare example of a company that has been in the film industry for over 30 years. It's now part of the cast and crew family, a company that has been serving the entertainment industry and enabling great content since 1976. Together, we aim to stay in business to see this through till 2050 at least. And as a group, we're uniquely positioned to enable the digital transformation of our industry through the Digital Production Office, with products and services from Final Draft, Media Services, CAPS and Media Guarantors. We aim to do even more by supporting BAFTA Albert and the work that it does. By signing up to this event, you've already demonstrated a commitment to understanding how climate change should be on your strategic agenda. It's set to be a really interesting discussion and a conversation that we really must have. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. And actually, thank you for all your support. Lawrence is a fantastic strategic thinker and has helped us at various times in our journey together over the last couple of years that we've been working together to help us understand how we have the greatest impact in the project. So before we go any further, let me just tell you what's going to happen. We have got actually 4 amazing speakers. We were publicised as 3, plus a little statement early on that we're going to hear from Baz, the chairman of ITV. Dr. Richard Carmichael from Imperial College, Kira Kalmus, who's the Economic Director at Ofcom, and Catherine Lampen, who is Head of Sustainability and a partner at Deloitte. They are all fascinating, and I'm absolutely thrilled and so proud that we've been able to attract them to come to this session today. But just before we kick off with hearing from them, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a Climate 101, just so that we can hold in our heads the context of exactly what we're talking about here. So let me just see if I can share my screen now, which I believe I can. And this is a statement, and actually I took this from the lovely people at ITV as a screen grab, thanks to Baz and others, from the news on the 20th of January of this year, before the pandemic had impacted us in the way it now does. And what the chief economist at the International Monetary Fund said was the biggest long-term threat to the world's economy is climate change. Unless action is taken now, there is real and present danger. Now, we whether she would have used the superlative biggest at the time of writing, had she known what was going to happen with the pandemic, is unclear. But certainly this crisis has not gone away. The climate crisis and the economic impact of that has not disappeared just because we have a pandemic. And that's really what we need to unpack with our panelists today. So 1.5 degrees, you've all heard about that. This is the level of warming the world can tolerate. The UN say that keeping to the target of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels will mean rapid, far-reaching, unprecedented changes in all society. That includes every individual and every business. But despite knowing this, and despite the fact that every nation came together in 2016 for the Paris Climate Agreement, if you add up all the policies and all the activities and all the actions of our businesses and our politicians and our governments, we're on course right now to hit 3.5 degrees. So something's gone wrong here in terms of how this adds up. Siobhan, I don't know whether you can just mute Kira for us just for 1 second until we start. And this is the scary slide that I just want to show you. And again, it's not intended to scare you, but and I'm really sorry that we haven't got time to go and unpack all the scientific evidence that supports this. But this is a map of what the world will look like at around 3.54 degrees warmer. It's evidence that has been created by the scientific community, and this is their illustration of what we're stumbling into inadvertently if we don't kind of correct ourselves and get things back on track. The yellow bits here are uninhabitable deserts. The brown bits are uninhabitable because of extreme weather conditions. The red bits are underwater now in this scenario. And this is what we need to avoid. This is kind of a scary picture that is the thing that we're actively seeking to try and undo. In order to do that, this is actually what we need to do. We need to halve our emissions by 2030, halve them again by 2040, and be net zero by 2050. I know that a few of you have asked exactly what net zero means, and Catherine and Richard actually will both deal with that question during their talk, so we won't specifically get into that now. But if you can hold that in your minds as the essence of what we're dealing with here as we go through the stimulus that we're about to hear, then I think that hopefully it will enable you to understand what your specific role is in your business, in broadcasting, in production, in order to deliver against those aims, because it belongs to all of us, not just governments and big industry. So without any further ado, let me introduce Peter. Peter Bazalgette, as you all will know, is the chairman of ITV, and I was very, very lucky to have a opportunity to speak to him in advance because he couldn't be here with us in person today. So a very short video from him, a little interview, and then we'll crack on with our speakers.
So, hi, Baz. Thank you so much for joining us at this event. I've heard you speak before about how important broadcasting is for the good of society. And obviously, when you think about society, you think about climate change, those two issues are intrinsically linked. So I was really just hoping to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit and hear your point of view about why you think broadcasting plays such a crucial role in UK society.
Yeah. Broadcasting has never had a particular problem defining how business should do good in the community, because if you take ITV, which I chair, but also other companies like Channel 4, BBC, Channel 5, we're called public service broadcasters, and we have specific responsibilities. And if you look at what we do, you could think of it in terms of the trusted and reliable news and information that a functioning democracy has to have, more important than ever probably in the internet era of fake news. The national conversation, national culture, shared culture and values that you get from everything from news programs to documentaries to reality shows to Coronation Street and EastEnders. But also that creative industries are a cornerstone of the economy. They're about 6% of the whole British economy now, and they're growing more than twice as fast. And the screen industries, which ITV is a part of, are about 20% of that cake. So they're pretty important economically. But another way in which they're important economically is what we call soft power, the way in which British-made programs get exported around the world, and where British culture goes, trade often follows. And in a post-Brexit world where Britain's got to trade with the world, that's pretty important. And there's another point, which is resilience. And I probably don't need to unpack this too much, given we've just been through a national emergency. Yeah. And, you know, you've had 25 million people watching stuff on ITV and BBC and getting key messages about lockdown, about social distancing, which is actually, whatever criticisms we have of the government, has actually worked. You know, Britain has got its death rate down from COVID. So there's messages got. So we understand the context in which you might want to say business has a responsibility to the community and should do good in the country.
When I hear you talk about those kind of 5 key things, I don't have to blur my eyes very much to see a direct correlation, I think, with all 5 of them and the climate crisis, because even though, as you allude to, we've had another crisis in recent months, the climate crisis hasn't gone away just because we've had a bigger, more pressing, more tangible agenda. Do you think that the climate element of that future should be more tangibly and intrinsically included in the business and economic strategies of broadcasters?
Well, look, I think we are doing that, and I think we do need to. Whether we need to be regulated to do it, I think it's more a question for the whole of the business community. And after all, if we're going to deliver on net zero by 2050, we're all going to have to do a hell of a lot, and we might talk about that in a minute. But look, I think reliable, well-researched, science-based news has been pretty important during the pandemic crisis, but it's just as important to get the science right with climate. And it's that evidence that enables us to all act on it. You know, if you take the economic arguments that matter, that I pointed out earlier for the creative industries and for broadcasters, I mean, we know that for our economy to be functioning in 2050, we need to crack the climate challenge. And we also know that within it, there are some real business opportunities. I think people have just had a glimpse of what a greener city is like over the last few weeks. They've seen what it's like to walk down a street with not breathing in fumes. They've seen what it's like to sit in a garden and smell the flowers and hear the birds. People like it.
Yeah.
Now, it's not that we don't want to have economic activity, but there's so much to do, because I think I'm right in saying that we've had something like a 4% drop in emissions during this crisis, but we actually need an annual drop in emissions of more like 7% plus to get to where we need to get to in 2050. So, as I say, lots of challenges, but lots of business opportunities within it.
Do you have any sort of specific advice for the business leaders that are attending our conference today about the things that they can do? And we've got commercial teams, finance leads, strategists in the room, in the virtual room with us, about how to deal with the crisis and how to prioritise the crisis in their business strategies.
Well, I'm not entirely sure people need my advice, but I'm very happy to say what we're doing at ITV. And maybe there's some read across for people. There'll be other companies probably already ahead of us. Look, ITV is a production company and a broadcaster who's got relatively low emissions, but this still matters. And I'd say I'd give 3 headings for how we're approaching it. The first would be how we're making it happen, how we're organising ourselves to make it happen. The second would be the whole question of climate-related disclosures. And the third would be how you make it work for your brand values and how that can be of benefit. So taking the making it happen, we're about to publish our 1.5 degree science-based emissions target. And to achieve that, we're going to have to build environmental considerations into every business decision we take. That's quite a new and important discipline, from financial to commercial. And we've set up a green team steering group with senior representatives from every board division in the business. So we are taking it seriously, and their remit is to do just that and deliver on the environmental targets within their own business areas. And it's not just coming from social purpose. You know, that would be a mistake. That would be like the old way of doing it. And I guess, you know, the 4 things our business recognizes we have to do is reduce our emissions, become a zero waste business, create 100% sustainable supply chain, and all our productions, our program productions, to be Albert certified. And some people will know what that is. That's the particular green certification in television production. And there's training that goes along with that, by the way, to make people know how to do it.
Yeah.
But the disclosures point, I'd recommend that businesses use the available climate-related disclosures to really test how embedded climate risk and opportunities are in their organisation. So ITV is disclosing against the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and CDP, which you know was the Carbon Disclosure Project.
Yeah.
When you measure financial impact the climate crisis can have on your organisation, it's much easier to shape your strategy in order to mitigate the risks. But if you haven't gone through the first stage, you can't really do the second. And the last point I was going to make was about brand value. If you look beyond immediate impact to the interests of viewers, because viewers in the case of broadcasters, consumers in the case of all programmes, there's a real commercial opportunity to show we're a company that gets it, and we're not afraid to act on it. And if we can encourage our viewers or any consumers to do the same, we don't just magnify the impact significantly, we enhance our brand value and brand standing with our customers. So I think there's benefit in that too. So actually, that's quite a list.
Yeah, I'll say you've got a bit to get on with. You're not too busy. Thank you. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And there's a number of things you've touched on there we're going to expand upon now in the course of our discussion with our panellists and our guest speakers. So thank you very much for making the time to speak to me and helping us set this up for success.
I hope the session goes well.
Thank you, Baz.
Good to see you.
Amazing, thank you. Oh, it was very weird watching myself back on video there, though. So let me introduce our first guest speaker, Catherine Lampen from Deloitte. She's a partner at Deloitte and heads up their sustainability division. And actually, I think it's fantastic the way that this is sort of unfolded when you do these interviews and you invite the speakers that you really want for an event like this. It kind of all falls beautifully into place because Baz referred to specifically the disclosures that the TCFD are recommending, which is an industry agnostic, I know, facility, if you like, or toolkit. So maybe, Catherine, if you can kind of help us understand what the context of that might mean for our industry, for broadcasting, that'd be fantastic. And I will disappear and leave you to it.
Absolutely.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tricia. Can we show the slide deck, please? Perfect. Okay, so what I want to do over the next kind of 5 to 10 minutes is talk to you a bit about the TCFD and how companies are trying to manage climate risk at the moment. So over the last 3 years, we've seen a massive change in how companies are considering integrating climate risk into everything they do. And that's in a large part been driven by the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, which was an initiative that came out of the Financial Stability Board. They launched a number of recommendations, 11 in 2017, to integrate climate risk into mainstream financial filings. With the reason behind that saying, you know, actually, environmental factors are a negative externality and they're not priced in the same way as other things that we value. And the idea behind it was, you know, to see how the climate crisis would impact different companies. So making them provide transparent disclosures so stakeholders can make informed decisions. Now, when this first came out, I think companies were a bit hesitant of this is another sustainability reporting framework. And you know, there are, for those of you that are involved directly in sustainability, you know that there are lots and lots of reporting standards out there already. But this took on a very different route because it spoke to investors directly, and it spoke to financial services in their language, you might say. So what we're seeing at the moment is countries mandating disclosures by TCFD, and we are also seeing lots of things come through from the EU, in particularly with financial services, making them integrate sustainable language and behaviours into all of the investment decisions, all of the banking decisions that are made. So that's having a knock-on impact on every other industry. So to give a bit of a flavour of that, over the last 3 years, there have been over 400 new pieces of legislation globally for banks, investment management firms and insurance firms to make sure that they are not exposed to stranded assets in the future. So yes, a stranded asset is, if you take, for example, an oil and gas company, and we've seen it very directly this week with BP's announcement. They're saying that actually in the future a number of their oil fields will become not economic to drill from anymore because of the changing technology to do with green renewables, but also public sentiment on sustainability and climate change. And what we're seeing is banks changing their lending decisions on this. They're going through something called stress testing next year, which will make them report on how they are exposed to this through their lending. So all corporate loans, for example, the banks are integrating a climate risk lens on that at the moment. And then from an investment management perspective, so companies that are managing funds, they're going to have to say, within their funds, how much of those funds are green. And so they're asking questions, they're engaging with companies in a much more direct way on what their kind of transition plan is to net zero. So we've seen institutional investors in particular targeting companies on this and actually saying that they're going to withdraw their funds if the disclosures according to the TCFD are not strong enough. So the TCFD, kind of going back to what that actually requires, so it's looking at the risks and opportunities for your company related to climate risk. And like I say, the recommendations are now becoming very mainstream in what they're requiring. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. So there are 3 areas of risks that you need to consider when you're looking at this space. So, what are the physical impacts that might impact your business? So we've seen quite a lot of this over the last 18 months. So things from everything from flooding, hurricanes, fire risk. Those are the things that you can kind of easily see and that are covered in the news every day. So might be the more obvious types of risk to your business. There are also something called transition risks, which are, the possibility of things like higher operating costs, new legislation, environmental taxes that you might have to pay in the future as governments become much more stringent in what they're requiring corporates to do in this space. And then there's an opportunity space for this as well. There's a cost saving impact, resource efficiency. And then I guess from a broadcasting perspective, there's opportunities around, content programming in this space, and the increased interest in how society is moving to a more sustainable world. So the 3 different areas that I've just discussed, we've seen it already within this industry. So we've seen companies be impacted by damage to recording facilities. We've seen supply chain disruptions due to fires, for example, in Australia earlier this year. We've seen companies have direct challenge from in their AGMs on the content that they're producing around climate change. And we've seen companies who have moved to a more sustainable way of working and have reduced costs quite significantly, particularly because of the quite significant air travel exposure in this space. So TCFD recommends that you use scenario analysis to dig into this a bit more. So it basically says, well, what will happen to your business if there is a 1.5, a 2 or a 4 degree world in terms of temperature change? And to give you a flavour of what that would mean, so a 4 degree change would result in a £20 trillion global economic loss per year. So absolutely kind of dwarfs what's going on with COVID and the financial crisis back in 2008. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of how this impacts your business, and I think we heard it in the last talk, you know, this is not something that is solely for the sustainability team, although their SME knowledge at this point comes in exceptionally valuable. So disclosure is required in 4 areas. So governance, who is responsible for climate risk in your business? Now, this in the last 10 years has traditionally been the sustainability department or the environmental department, but now this is a board level responsibility, and that structure, right from you know, how you set strategy at board level, needs to be integrated into everything you do. So we're seeing, you know, the Financial Reporting Council look at how companies are taking up this governance responsibility for climate risk. We're also seeing a rise across all corporates globally in having a board level committee on sustainability that reports in the same way as the remuneration and risk committees. We're seeing from a strategy perspective, we're seeing how companies are trying to achieve net zero. So that is how they're reducing their emissions, how they're changing decision making relating to what they do on a day-to-day basis to reduce their emissions, and then finally offsetting, which is kind of the final resort in this space. And they're looking at how they're future-proofing their strategies in a rapidly changing world. So, you know, what does that mean for content in the future? And then from a risk management perspective, they're looking at how you manage and respond to physical and transitional risks. I think if you looked at most annual reports 3 or 4 years ago, they wouldn't have climate change or environmental risk as a factor at all. We're seeing that change dramatically at the moment, with most companies now thinking about these broader environmental and social risks. And I think obviously with the impact of COVID, we're seeing an even more intense look at that, because obviously that's had a massive impact on a number of companies and was a risk that isn't traditionally considered. We're seeing at I guess a broadcasting production level, environmental and climate change factors being integrated into risk assessments that you would do, like a health and safety assessment. But we are seeing, again, a lot of involvement from chief risk officers in this space. And then finally around metrics and targets. So we're seeing much better accounting for emissions in this area at the moment, with much more stringent targets. I think we've seen a practice over the last kind of 6 to 12 months of a lot of companies going out with net zero ambitions without really thinking about how they're going to achieve that. So, you know, getting those accounting practices right is really important. And ultimately what TCFD requires is you to integrate your emissions and the consequent price of those emissions into your financial statements. So that will then lead to, you know, could lead to potential impairments, which is what we've seen with the BP's £15 billion write-down this week. So that's a quick guide through TCFD. There is a massive document that you can read which tells you in a lot more detail the types of KPIs you should report, the types of governance structures that exist in this space, and ideas around strategy. But I'll hand it back to you, Tricia, and so you can, if there's any questions.
Yes, there are a couple of questions. So just let me remind those who've just joined us what the format is here today. We've got 2 more official speakers, but actually a surprise speaker coming on as well at the very end. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions now that have just come up in the course of while you've been talking, Catherine, and then we're going to hand over to Kira. And at the very end, we'll bring all of you back together for more questions. So do keep the questions coming and we'll try and answer as many as we can. So the first thing that's come up is from Susie, just made a comment really, but I think it is worth you probably trying to help us expand this a little bit and understand this. Wondering how legislative change and statutory requirements might play out, I guess specifically in the context of broadcasting.
Yeah, so what we're expecting, I guess the first thing to happen in this space is through the EU non-financial reporting framework, which basically states what companies have to report in this area in their annual reporting. And they've already said that they're going to integrate TCFD requirements into what they require. So we'll see it coming through from the reporting angle. But the government, the UK government, has set obviously a really ambitious goal around net zero. So I think what we're going to see over the next 6 months is a huge change in the number of additional regulations coming in the UK specifically on this. We know that the government has an ambition to be at the very forefront of this, and you know, one of the ways of doing that is through statutory instruments. So we're expecting to see, I guess, a variety of different, I guess, things happen. The financial services side of it is really pushing what's happening here. So I would say that's had more of an impact than the regulation coming through. The fact that the banks are going to have to say, investment managers are going to have to say how exposed they are to organisations that might have a risk in this space is really driving change at the moment. And we've seen companies that are not necessarily high impact, like the oil and gas firms, be targeted and being pulled out as examples on this. So that's creating quite a lot of change. And then I think globally we're seeing quite significant changes in regulatory regimes to integrate TCFD at the moment. So it really is seen as something that's quite robust, and also I think eventually TCFD will be extended to other sustainability areas and potentially even social areas as well. So that's something to look forward to for all of us.
Do you think that it will remain, I mean, this is a question from me, do you think it will remain voluntary, or do you think at some point, I mean, it actually touches on a question from Neil. He says, government controls have been key to slowing COVID. With climate change promising to be far worse than COVID, isn't dramatic ongoing government intervention essential? And I think you've almost answered that in your previous answer. But will it remain just something we do altruistically because we think it's a good idea, or because it's a good idea for the long-term stability of our business, or is it going to...
I mean, we've seen governments across the world post-COVID say that companies are only going to get loans going forwards if they have met certain sustainability criteria. And I imagine that there will eventually be quite a lot more regulation in this space. We know from FY22, companies will be mandated to report on TCFD in the UK, but it varies globally. So, you know, the US is a little bit different. But then, for example, in Japan, this is already mandatory, and companies have been reporting for over a year in this space.
Right. I think we better leave it there, because I'm really keen to hear from the rest of the speakers, and then we'll bring you back, because I think there are a couple of questions that came in the advance, questions that we might want to unpack, but they may get answered by Kira or Richard in the meantime. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again in about half an hour. So our next speaker is Kira Kalmus, who is going to help us think about more specifically what this might mean for our industry, for the broadcaster industry, and really help us unpack what the role might be for the regulator as we move through this. I know that you can't answer that question, Kira, but specifically, but you can help us think about the direction of travel on that. So over to you. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us.
So hi, everybody. I'm Kira Kalmus, and I'm a Director of Economics at Ofcom. And I'm really delighted to be able to come and speak today, partly because this relates to two projects which I've been currently working on at Ofcom. The first is an internal project looking at the impact of the sectors that we regulate on climate change. And secondly is the review of the public service broadcasting, where I'm directing the economic analysis. So the first thing I'm going to briefly touch on is what is the net zero target, and then I'm going to look at the direct effect of broadcasting on climate change, and then how indirectly broadcasting can affect climate change through the content that broadcasters produce. So first, what is the net zero target? Well, in July last year, the UK government passed legislation committing the UK to reducing emissions of greenhouse gases to net zero by 2050. So, and this means that by 2050, the amount of, say, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases the UK puts out into the atmosphere should be equaled by the amount that's absorbed by things like, forests from the UK. This is an incredibly demanding target. So just to think in context, last year the UK was estimated to have emitted over 350 million tonnes of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And we're going to have to remove all of those. And this really requires action from all of us. So all individuals and all industries will have to reduce emissions to meet this goal. When we look at broadcasters, there are two key ways broadcasters can help meeting the goal. So directly through the way they produce and distribute content, and secondly, by creating content which helps consumers move to sustainable lifestyles. And I think this latter objective is maybe particularly important for public service broadcasters who have a particular responsibility to add social value. So let's first briefly touch on direct emissions from broadcasting. So what emissions are produced from broadcasting? Well, they're produced from two sources. So emissions caused directly when broadcasters produce content, and emissions caused when they transmit the content. In my talk, I'm only really going to focus on the emissions from transmission, and that's just for the simple reason that the internal work we've been doing in Ofcom has focused on that area. But not to forget, there's also emissions from producing content. And I'm going to look separately at the emissions from linear broadcasting and then the emissions from streaming, from video on demand. So look at linear broadcasting. I've got here a very simple diagram of how linear productions are broadcast. So you start off with one large TV mast, which uses energy to send out signals to people's TV aerials, which then go to their TV screen. If we look at the transmission area itself, or the TV mast, this emits the same amount of emissions or uses the same amount of energy, whether it's broadcasting to 10 people or to 10 million people. And what this means is that it can be very efficient if it's watched by large numbers of people. So when you've got very large audiences, so in the millions, the tens of millions, as Bas was touching on for some of the COVID broadcasts, this can be a really efficient technology. The signal's sent to the TV aerial, which interestingly don't use any power to function. So these themselves do not cause emissions. And then they're sent to the TV screen. And when one looks at the overall emissions from linear broadcasting, the majority of the use emissions come from the TV themselves. And these will vary depending on the age of the TV. More modern TVs tend to be more efficient for the same size compared to older TVs, but also depending on the size of the screen. So largely, the bigger the screen, the more the emissions. And I've quoted here some figures of, from the Energy Saving Trust of how much energy is used by a sort of 40-inch TV. If you look at streaming services, these video on demand services such as Netflix and iPlayer, these work in quite a different way. So these use broadband connections to get content into people's homes. So in these cases, when a customer requests a program, it'll send a signal which will go to the data center or the local exchange where the content is stored, and that will bring it back down to the consumer's homes. There have been some claims that that the emissions from these sources have been growing exponentially, because as we all know, the growth in internet traffic and the growth in streaming is growing exponentially. And there has been a question as to, does that mean that the amount of energy used from streaming is also growing exponentially? I have here a graph on the right-hand side from the International Energy Agency, which has taken a look at this. So you can see here, there's a green line, which is internet traffic. which shows a very strong growth, so growing by 5 times from 2015 to 2021. This has led to also to a growth in data center workloads, though at a slightly lower pace. Though when they've looked at the amount of electricity used by the data centers themselves, that has actually stayed relatively flat. And the reason for this has been improvements in technology. So just as technology has been improving elsewhere, technology in data centers has improved to, has so far been managed to improve to keep pace with the growth in workload, so that the new servers are more efficient than older servers. There's been a move to cloud computing, which means that the more traffic can be dealt with by the same server, so that it has really led to relatively flat use. And within this area, there's something called Cobenefits law, which has found that the energy efficiency of computing, so the amount of electricity generated per megabit of computing, has been doubling roughly every 3 years since 2007. And when we're also considering how much electricity is used, we've also got to take into account what device people are watching it on. And there, one thing that my children will be delighted with is that watching TV or watching streaming services on your smartphone uses approximately 100 times less energy than watching on a very large widescreen TV. And then if you look overall, there have been estimates of exactly how much do all these digital technologies, so the internet, account for carbon emissions, and that's estimated to be around 1.5% of global carbon emissions. But even if some emissions, the transmission emissions aren't growing exponentially, that really is just not good enough. Because if we leave things unchanged, as Trish was mentioning earlier, we will be in line for a rise in climate change of 3.5 degrees, which will have catastrophic impacts on the environment. So that means broadcasters, like everyone else, need to make reductions to meet this net zero target. So they can do that in 2 ways. They can look about reducing the emissions that are produced when they're making content. So being careful about what's happening about air travel, are you using electric cars, etc. And then when you're transmitting content, being careful to reduce the amount of energy you use. And when you do have to use energy or electricity, make sure it's renewable energy wherever possible. In terms of energy use, I think there was a very interesting little case study during this current COVID crisis, where at the very beginning of lockdown, when everyone started working from home, there was real concern that the internet and networks would not be able to cope with the amount of something video streaming as our people moved to home working. And in response, YouTube and Netflix agreed to reduce the bitrate of their streaming services by 25% due to COVID. As far as I'm aware, there's been no sort of consumer reaction to this. And it just shows that, really, what does your bitrate need to be? And you can also look at making sure that your data centers, or cloud computing, is as efficient as it can be. Okay, I'm now going to move on to talk about content and climate change. And I'm going to keep this relatively brief because I believe Dr. Richard Carmichael will touch into this again after me. So looking in particular at public service broadcasters, which is sort of Ofcom's focus, we see that the purpose of public service broadcasting is to create value for society. And this is particularly important when we're looking about climate change, because it means that broadcasters can influence climate change through the content they produce. I've included here sort of the mission of the BBC to create content which informs, which educates and entertains. And all forms of these content can impact consumers' behaviour in terms of climate change. So content which informs and educate, it's relatively straightforward to see how such content can help inform the public about what the impact of climate change and what they need to do. What I'd like to draw attention to is just how powerful the impact on consumers' behaviour can be from sort of programmes and topical issues. And I'd like to use the example here of the Richard Attenborough's Blue Planet 2 climate change documentary from 2017. And this really focused on people's attention to the impact of plastics and how devastating they were for marine life. So this programme, really high audiences at the time, and it is shown to have had a measurable impact on people's behaviour. So this was broadcast in October 2017, and in the following year, twice as many people volunteered to participate in cleaning up British beaches from the year before. And what I find even more striking is when they were cleaning up the beaches, they found that there was fewer items of plastic waste on the shore compared to the year before. And I find this really, really striking, because what it shows is it's not just that that the impact of the programme seemed to impact on sort of environmental activists. So it's not just that it just got more people cleaning up, but it seemed to have some impact on behaviour across society, making people much more conscious about plastic waste. In terms of entertainment programmes, it's also important that climate change values can also be embedded in this entertainment. So all entertainment programmes, all drama, all soaps, all other programmes, they always will send out some messages about what's valued for society. And these messages can be either positive or negative. So just to give one little example here, I've got a picture of Nadia Hussain from the Great British Bake Off. So this is a programme, an entertainment programme, ostensibly about baking cakes. But the simple presence of having, a British-born, a British-born Muslim wearing a headscarf from an arranged marriage of Bangladeshi origin was claimed to have done more for race relations at a time where there was rising Islamophobia than any government initiative. And this really shows the power of entertainment programmes at just influencing society. So one message I would like to have for broadcasters to think about when you are making your content is what messages are your programmes sending on sustainability? So what are they sending about air travel, about sustainable lifestyles, about encouraging the adoption of electric vehicles? So that's the end of my talk. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very, very much, Kira. That was absolutely fascinating. There are a couple of questions that are coming through. I think one of them you've almost answered. The first one is from Miranda. Will 5G increase the streaming emissions? I know you talked about the bit rate reductions that Netflix and Amazon and others have taken as a step during the pandemic, but specifically just on 5G, I mean, briefly just answer that question.
Yeah, so this is an area we have been looking into at Ofcom. And so will it increase the emissions? So overall, we expect not. So if you're looking at the amount of emissions done per technology, 5G technology is much more efficient than 4G technology. So they will be able to, you'll be rising traffic, but there will be less energy used per megabit of traffic with 5G than there is with 4G. I mean, of course, there is always a point where, there might always be a question of how far can these energy improvements continue to go? But so far, that hasn't been.
Okay, I mean, that actually then leads nicely, how far can energy improvements go, to the next question, which actually, Neil, you've done us a great job of helping us think about our next speaker as well. Neil asks, how should broadcasters and media companies plan to restructure their business models under the extreme shocks ahead? Economic unrest, resource scarcity, infrastructure damage. It doesn't seem like traditional business models will be sustainable under these conditions. And actually, just when you start to lens that over all the conversations we've had, sort of planning this event, you start to think about, 5G, all very well, reducing your emissions, but what's the purpose of that? Which comes back to the purpose of broadcasting and the shifts that we need to have in society. As I say, I think this is teeing up our next speaker beautifully. Would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think I can comment directly on how you to restructure your business, but what I would like to emphasize is everybody really needs to be thinking about this area and what they can do.
Okay, brilliant. We will hear from Kira again at the end of the session when I bring everybody back, but just for right now, let us introduce our next speaker, Dr. Richard Carmichael from Imperial College London. He is absolutely fascinating man. I had the pleasure of meeting with him. We had a 2-hour conversation, which I think surprised us how long and how much we wanted to talk. So I'm really excited that you all get to hear from him today. Just help us think about what this means from a societal perspective, what the public perspective is going to be, and how as broadcasters we need to think differently, I guess, about aspiration. That's the theme that I would ask you to hold in your heads as you listen to him. Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. All right. Okay, thank you, and thanks to Bafra Albert for inviting me. As Kara said, I'm mostly going to be talking about content. So essentially considering the potential role for broadcasting in net zero from, as was said, the point of view of consumers and citizens and behavior change and public engagement, which is the sort of area I work on. So obviously we have a UK net zero target of zero emissions by 2050. So this is 100% as opposed to 80%, which went before. And this means that, as another speaker mentioned, every industry, every activity has to decarbonize. So previously, I think some industries were hoping they would fall into the 20% that didn't have to, of emissions that were going to be remaining. Everyone will, and what small emissions remain will have to be offset and reduced through tree planting and other carbon capture measures. So it really is a big, it is a big ask and a big target. So a bit of background to lead into the question of broadcasting's, how broadcasting fits into all of this. 3 questions really. What are the activities currently, and I'm thinking about households and consumers, that are problematic and have big carbon impact? Once we know that, could we decarbonize those without bothering people? And maybe we don't need behavior change and to engage the public. And finally, if we do need behavior change and engaging people, is it really feasible? And what are the challenges and potential to do this? And then finally getting onto broadcasting. So with thanks to the Energy Systems Catapult for the nice diagram, you can see that the 4 biggest components of an average household's carbon footprint presently are heating, transport, diet, and flying, or driving and flying and heating and eating. And as we move forward to a net zero level of emissions in 2050, they all reduce greatly, and the remaining emissions are going to be largely made up by the aviation and food sort of activities. And this is obviously talking about average households. So there is, particularly with aviation, a huge variation between households, which has implications I'll touch on later to do with fairness. So these are the big 4, and we really need to be thinking about these ones primarily, not exclusively, but we need to think about these 4. So can we do this without involving households? As far as decarbonising electricity and waste has gone, and the UK has made really good progress, really impressive progress in the last decade or so on those 2, that hasn't really involved consumers and households. So is it possible to decarbonise the other behaviours and activities upstream? Short answer is no. CCC estimates that well over half of the measures that are going to be required to get to net zero are going to involve either behavior changes or some combination of new technologies and behavior change. And of course, if you do have a sort of technical fix in a new technology, say electric vehicles or heat pumps, we still need to engage the public so that they actually adopt them, which is no small thing. Thinking about the scale of the challenge, it really is a huge task ahead of us, and it's in uncharted territory in the sense that we're going to have to go further and faster than any other country's gone before, and than we've gone before. So that limits the amount of experience that we have to draw on, and increases the uncertainty about how to go about it. On top of that, it is true to say that we've hardly started, apart from the power sector, perhaps, and certainly not in terms of engaging people at the level that we'll need to. So people really don't yet understand exactly what they need to do, and they're not doing it. And because that's the sort of norm, that actually involves some more social aspects of the context we're in, which essentially make it even harder to get the ball rolling. Because there's a norm of people not really doing much, other people will follow that norm. So passive inaction breeds more inaction. So currently there's sort of negative feedback effects, if you like, of reinforcing the status quo. So, I mean, there's several ways you could describe it. There's the kind of conforming to that norm of inaction. With unfamiliar technologies and behaviors, we often look to other people, what's called social proof, in terms of interpreting what to do in that situation. That's kind of operating in the wrong direction still. And it's very easy to rationalize doing nothing because, who's really responsible? It's very diffuse, the responsibility. And it's easy to put things off till later as well, because we're all busy, and just, as I say, there's some uncertainty still about exactly what you need to do and when you need to do it by. So that's the kind of challenge. More optimistically, even in the last few years, we've seen a real rise in public concern and preparedness to do something, real interested in climate action. And people generally do want to do their bit under the right circumstances, which include the government stepping up and doing their bit, and other people, seeing that other people are doing their bit too. So more specifically as well, there's interest in renewables and technology such as EVs, if they're affordable, batteries, solar panels. There's a real appetite there potentially that we can tap into. And the change that we need to see it's not all going to be about giving stuff up and painful changes. And I can't really overstate the importance of co-benefits, in the sense that things may change which reduce carbon, but they also deliver some other benefits alongside that. Health benefits from, say, cycling to work instead of driving, or changing your diet, and that has health savings for the NHS, and also air quality, which we've seen with the kind of lockdown situation around the world. Air quality really improved with reduced cars and planes. So that's another cause for optimism. We can go through that route. And lastly, just as before, and well, currently, there's some negative feedback effects which reinforce people doing nothing. Once we get some momentum up, I want to talk now about the feedback effects that can make change lead to greater change and increase the momentum of change. So, for example, you have some behavior change, ideally in one of the big 4 areas for households, but it could be other things. Once some people change their behavior, then other people tend to follow. People underestimate the sort of degree to which they're influenced by others, and lots of research and evidence on these grounds. Broadly, you could call it social contagion. For example, photovoltaic panels, they tend to cluster in areas because once one person in the neighborhood's got one and it's visible, others tend to be much more likely to adopt solar panels as well. Smoking is a good example as well about, you could say, the behavioral externalities, modeled after the economic term, negative externalities. Those effects of smoking is the worst one, in a sense, is that you are making other people more likely to be smokers. So if we can harness those sorts of social influence effects, then you get more behavior change and it leads to potentially social tipping points. Another feedback is industry and market response. A good example is vegan food market, which has exploded in the last few years. Products emerge which wouldn't have been launched otherwise, and that makes it even easier for other people to change, and costs come down. PV and lithium batteries are a good example of how costs have plummeted. And I mentioned co-benefits. That's another way that feedback effects can occur. Behavior change delivers some co-benefits, and that reinforces more behavior change. Plus, because you get co-benefits much quicker than you see the results in the climate, which could take decades, it makes it easier to get some policy through as well. So government may deliver a policy on road transport because of the air quality benefits rather than the climate benefits. And on the policy front, there's presently a bit of a disconnect really between policymakers and the public. Great research by Rebecca Willis on how MPs don't feel they have a mandate to champion climate change. Not only is behavior change visible to other consumers and citizens, but it's potentially visible to policymakers. So there's a good feedback loop potentially for government to see people their citizens engaging with solutions, and therefore feel like they can go faster and further with policy. And last year I wrote a report for the Committee on Climate Change, mostly focused on the policy side and how that could better support public engagement and behavior change for net zero. So there's three last kind of issues to cover on there. One is if you're going to ask the public to step up and do stuff, policy has to deliver a context which is consistent and fair and shows leadership. Secondly, if you want people to do stuff, make it easy. So make it affordable, reduce those barriers. Other barriers include just complexity of making certain decisions, make it normal as much as possible and attractive. So policy can do a lot to reduce barriers to changing behaviours. And secondly, lastly, if you've got all these feedback effects nicely working, policy should aim to reinforce those. So the social contagion feedback loop essentially depends on visibility of those behaviours to others. So policy could make those more visible in various ways. And I'll be coming back to that visibility issue for broadcasting. There's also a role for NGOs, but today I don't really have time. So we're going to consider finally the role for broadcasting. Obviously, broadcasting has a footprint in its activities, as Cara was talking about. But I think the biggest opportunity for broadcasting by far is not its footprint, but its handprint. This is a concept that's been used to talk about what positive impact you can have on others in terms of their carbon footprint that's separate to what your emissions are. So broadcasting really is in an amazing position to have a huge and increasingly green handprint on the public's engagement and behaviour change for net zero. So that's what I want to kind of finish really developing that idea. And as I say, visibility is key, and broadcasting is in great position to have a really big role in making all sorts of desirable behaviours more visible, more normal, and reflecting that change as it happens, and also leading that change in its content. And a couple of the takeaways from that complicated feedback loop diagram is, one, it kind of shows you where you can intervene to get things moving and behaviours changing and system change. But it also means that whatever impact you deliver doesn't stop there, it leads into further system changes. So that's another cause for optimism, that broadcasting can contribute to bigger changes which may not have been contemplated. So where in the system might broadcasting's influence be felt? Not exclusively, but primarily in these four areas. So certainly the social contagion feedback loop to develop and build up momentum in behaviour change and public engagement in the public. And number 8 would be supporting that through making it more visible, as broadcasting is in a great place to do. And also as an industry, number 2 down on the left, as an industry, the broadcasting can respond to the changing context of changing audiences and households in terms of, you know, being further down the road and changing their behaviors and lifestyles. Not so much falling costs, but new products, you know, tailoring content in a way that's going to be viable for the long tail, for audience tastes in the future, which may change in ways we're not really fully appreciating yet. We've just seen recent events with Black Lives Matter result in some rethinking of content. And then number 3, again, the co-benefits, which can motivate behavior change. There's a real opportunity there, but I'll finish. My final slide is going to develop that a little bit more. Essentially running with the green handprint, sort of metaphor, and 5 ways in which broadcasting and the content within broadcasting may reflect on its current impact and future possible impact. So one is the content could model behaviors. I show examples of what we ought to be doing or would be desirable for us to do. And if that missed out the heat, transport, diet and aviation, that would be a mistake. We need to at least cover those big ones. As well as wasn't all that bad necessarily, at least for some people, because it was basically showing what you shouldn't be doing. Though ultimately it depends on whether people identify with whoever's doing it. Secondly, the content could have a role in making the unfamiliar familiar, and what's abstract about net zero, for example, just the term net zero, much more concrete and related to everyday lives. So unfamiliar technologies like heat pumps and electric vehicles and smart meters could be sort of shown in much more concrete and familiar ways. Number 3, obviously awareness and information is still an issue. It doesn't necessarily have to come through news and documentaries. It can be done in much more subtle ways, in the background or foreground of any kind of show. And this can help people to be better informed as consumers in what to go out and spend their money on, but also as citizens to take part in the democratic kind of process around net zero and getting there, which is no small thing. Fourthly, it's not just a matter of cramming in more stuff into content, which may be good to hear. What's left out is also going to matter. We can show less of certain technologies and high carbon technologies and behaviors and attitudes and stereotypes. I believe advertising is sort of being regulated for the use of stereotypes. So what's left out can be really, really important as well. And again, this brings in the sort of what's the audiences of tomorrow going to how is it content going to match their tastes. And finally, as I said, can't overstress it. Highlighting the co-benefits is a great way of engaging people on action for climate change. It's not all about carbon. So that would be a hugely missed opportunity if that wasn't, if that route wasn't taken, and programming can do that in all sorts of ways, just subtly highlighting the health benefits of this or that. The financial savings for some things are there already. And then longer term, as society does shift and behaviors do become, new norms emerge for behaviors, reflecting that in the new reality is going to be very valuable as well, just to reinforce those shifts in norms. And air quality is one that's going to take a bit longer to emerge in a stable sense, and job creation. Those are great things to highlight. So yeah, run out of fingers and run out of time. So that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And seeing that feedback loop page come together in the animation, it was just, it's really, really brilliant and really helps us step through it. So I've got one question from our attendees today for you quickly, and then I'm going to actually introduce our sort of secret special guest very briefly before we just come back for the last 10 minutes for some more questions. So Neil, thank you so much, Neil, for your questions and your engagement in this today. In the COVID crisis, people have actually wanted more government intervention, firmer rules and clearer direction. When we say that the public is resistant to change, although I'm not sure that we do necessarily, perhaps they're just misinformed, is that really just an excuse? Does this need to come from government?
You want me to answer now?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
And then we'll introduce Tony.
Sure. Yeah, basically my position is that there's a lot that government could do, and my report for the CCC was included about 50 recommendations, plus a few others, on how to make it easier for people to take action. I do agree that it would be a bad move to just sort of try and motivate people and say, do this, without making it easier and enabling them to do it. So that's the role that policy needs to sort of step up to now, is to enable behavior change, not just sort of ask for it or motivate people. And there are some real barriers that need to be lowered. And as I said, the other thing is the wider context. You may have enabled someone to buy an EV, but if the bigger policy context is perceived by people to be unfair, there may be support for fossil fuels, or there may people be able to point to frequent flyers and say, well, why should I bother about my heating system if there's someone's frequent flyers carbon footprint's hundreds times mine? So you've got to be consistent across everything and take out the reasons people may be able to sort of use to do nothing. So you've got to do everything. You've got to do it consistently, and you've also got to think of all the barriers to behaviors. And once that's done, then yes, people should sort of step up where they can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I was very, very privileged. I'm going to just introduce our last speaker. It's going to be very, very quick. I was very privileged to meet Tony Burden, who's the CEO of Make My Money Matter. And it's a scheme that I found out about some months ago when I spoke to one of Tony's colleagues about what they were planning. And it was very interesting that we had a question actually in the advanced questions specifically about investments. Can the industry shift their pensions into net zero? And I know that there's a lot of money wrapped up, and in fact Richard just alluded to the fact around fossil fuels and investment in fossil fuels just there in his talk as well. So this is actually not going to be launched until the 29th of June. It becomes a public matter, and we're so lucky that we've been able to invite and have Tony come and talk to us today to give us a little heads up on what's coming down the line. But I won't give any spoilers away, so I'll leave it to you just to describe what the campaign is.
Brilliant, thanks Tricia, and great to have this opportunity. And I just think it's really impressive what you're doing with the broadcasting industry and looking at how to green the industry. It's just brilliant. One of the things that you can do, and sort of Richard just now alluded to the different actions individuals can take, but one of the things that's often forgotten is that you can green your financial footprint. So, we've all got pensions, we've got bank accounts, some of us have investments. How can we align those with our values? How can we align them with net zero? So Make My Money Matter, we're a people-powered campaign. We're spearheaded by Richard Curtis, who you'll all know from his role in sort of films and TV. But he's also the UN Secretary General's advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals, co-founder of Comic Relief, and very passionate about this issue. So we'll start on pensions as a campaign. There are £3 trillion invested in pensions for the UK and 40 trillion globally. And all of that money is invested in businesses, in oil and gas companies, in agricultural businesses that undertake deforestation, or in businesses that are contributing to global warming. But it doesn't have to be this way. And our campaign will try and get the pensions industry to invest in line with the values of pension savers, of their members, and in a sense create pensions that we can be proud of. It's our money being invested over many, many years. Why can't we be proud of our pension? So what do we want as a campaign? I think the first thing is for the pension industry to report rigorously on risks and opportunities. And Catherine talked about that earlier with TCFD, but also on environmental risks, on social risks, how do businesses treat their workers, on governance risks, how well are companies governed, And what we need is a more comprehensive reporting of these risks, but also of the opportunities. Once you understand risks, you can start to shift your investment alignment in different ways. And the Department of Work and Pensions is consulting around reporting on TCFD for the industry. So that's one chunk. The other bit is for pension funds to grow the portfolio that has a positive impact and that's measurable. And renewable energy would be one of those. It's an industry that's really growing in scale. But can our pensions also invest in things we care about, whether that's social housing or medical companies and so on? And the third thing, which we're here today to talk about, is we want pension portfolios, their investments, to be consistent with the Paris targets, with 1.5 degrees, a commitment to net zero by 2050, and a halving of emissions by 2030. Now, the thing is that in the past, industry has felt constrained. The trustees of your pension fund have a fiduciary duty, and that's that they put the interest of their members as their primary function, their primary duty. And that duty has been interpreted as just maximizing financial returns. And that's the only priority. But the Law Commission undertook work a few years ago to try and clarify that duty and whether it's possible for pension funds to also look at other investments or other priorities, including the views of their members. And the Law Commission, in the end, set out that it's completely feasible for trustees to invest in line with their members' values, as long as there's no significant detriment to the fund. In other words, they need to make wise financial decisions that don't harm future returns to pensioners. So there's very much scope to invest in a different way. So I think in terms of what you can do as an industry and as individuals, I think the first three things. The first one, join our campaign. Have a look at our website, sign up to our manifesto, calling for a pension that you can be proud of. I think as individuals, ask your pension provider where your money's invested, what impact it has, and can it be better? Can it be more sustainable? Could your pension portfolio be aligned with net zero? Ask your employer the same. Your employer should be providing a pension that you can be proud of. And I think thirdly then, as businesses, as you think about the industry, join our campaign. So part of our campaign is for businesses, NGOs, local authorities, universities, other organisations like the Church of England pension scheme. Join us as partners, and the only thing you have to do to join us as partners is to commit to aligning your staff pension fund with the values of your members, to engage with your members, and ultimately to try and ensure that your staff pension fund is more sustainable. And I think if you have an interest in trying to align with net zero in your business, why not, make that real with your pension too? We're going to launch, it's now the 30th of June, Tricia, and we can share the link to that. We have an event with Richard Curtis, with Mark Carney, who's now both the UK and the UN's lead on private finance and climate change. Helen Dean, the CEO of Nest, which is a very large pension fund in the UK. Tanya Steele, the CEO for WWF, and the chair of the pensions board for HSBC Bank. So we'll launch on the 30th. But once we launch in the UK, we'll reach out across Europe to G7 countries, G20 countries, and then focus campaigning next year. The UK will host the G7 in June. And at the end of the year, we'll host COP26, the big global climate meeting. So there's a real opportunity to get action on pensions and to drive change, both in the industry, the pensions industry, but across businesses as well, leading all the way up to COP26. The financial sector is probably one of the biggest systemic threats to the planet. So it's really important that we try and shift the sector into doing the right thing. But I think, again, Richard highlighted, there are huge commercial opportunities in new industries that will develop. over time. So, so it's completely viable for business and for pension funds to be doing the right thing. Okay, I think that's everything, Tricia, I wanted to say. Over to you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. And thank you for joining us at sort of such short notice as well. We really, really appreciate it. Right, so we've got 10 minutes left for some Q&A. There is a question that's just come through on the Q&A, which is actually probably a question for Albert, so I will try and answer that one in a minute. But since we're very, very short of time, I did just want to, if I can have all of our lovely panelists, Kira, Richard and Catherine back, that would be amazing. I wanted to ask you guys this question. I don't know which one of you wants to have a stab at it. Maybe it's one for Kira. If editorial content does not match international protocols on climate change, will television content become a stranded asset? I mean, that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about here, doesn't it, in terms of the economic impact this might have on our industry?
Yeah, I think it's possible that it could do. So I think one just has to look about what's happened recently with the Black Lives Matter protests, where certainly we find that societal norms have moved and broadcasters have been looking at some of their old content and have removed some of it from the from the screen because it no longer is seen as acceptable. So that's certainly possible if societal norms move.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question which came massively consistently through the Q&A, but has been mentioned again now here, is what is the difference between net zero and zero, or I guess what they're referring to is global zero? Richard or Catherine, whichever one of you would like to take it. Richard, brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I guess some people I interpret the question as being the difference between net zero and absolute zero, which is what some people are kind of saying we do need. But the net part is essentially, if you add up the emissions that we have, which are obviously going to be much smaller, and you look at the amount of carbon that we're drawing out of the atmosphere, then the net is zero. The sort of, plus or minus is zero. So there is a certain amount of tree planting and carbon capture and storage and other carbon removals measures planned. But the closer we get to absolute zero in terms of our positive emissions, clearly the less pressure on us to remove carbon. But the net shouldn't be used as a way of saying, well, we can emit some, so it's okay. It is going to be very tough to get to net, and that'll mean reducing as much as possible.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. It's a balancing act, isn't it, basically? It's about balance. There was a question just a minute ago, which I think we've said has been, somebody's chat has been disabled. It might have been answered, which is just about when the launch of the Make My Money Matter campaign is. So Tony has answered that on the Q&A if you want to just drop in there and see that. And if you go to their website, there's a whole bunch more information there. So Katie, thank you. Great webinar. Looking forward to seeing the scenario analysis of broadcasters TCFD. There's lots of opportunities in relation to handprints. I guess linking what you were talking about, Catherine, with the comments that Richard's made. The big challenge for UK-US content is to switch from on-screen high-carbon middle-class lifestyles from being so aspirational. We need to decouple middle-class lifestyles from being high carbon on screen and point out that people from less wealthy backgrounds are contributing less to climate change. Catherine, I don't know whether you want to just make a comment just in relation to the TCFD, and it harks back to the point that we made about whether content becomes a stranded asset in the context of how society is emitting.
I think we might be a little way off, I guess, disclosures around whether there's stranded assets related to content as such. But I do think that businesses that go through the cycle of doing TCFD will really be able to understand how it might impact their overall operation. So I think, we'll see them linking different things together quite quickly, between strategy, between reporting, between how they use their sustainability team. And that then will have a knock-on impact on the content side.
Yeah. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, just a thought. I suppose another way of looking at the stranded asset issue is that, why take the risk, basically? Why not go down a more kind of forward-thinking route for your content? What's the downside? And, you know, you'd be risking some perhaps reputational damage and maybe not attracting the best talent. So kind of what's the upside to not doing, you know, a kind of progressive content?
Yeah, I agree completely. Kira, there's a couple of questions here that are related that I might just pose to you, and then I guess we'll have to try and draw this conversation to a close, which seems such a shame because it's so interesting. Are there plans for other broadcasters and commissioners, UK and international, to put climate sustainable actions into their production agreements? For example, insisting on Albert certification for all productions like ITV, or is there a role for this to be added to Ofcom regulations? And just pause before you answer, because the next question then is, one of the limits that we've encountered editorially is around what is seen as being campaigning and hence not part of our public service remit. Could Ofcom help clarify the role of public service in this area and what is considered to be a public service? On the Albert part of it, that is voluntary, but you're right, Miranda, who asked that question. Some organisations are starting to say they want to make certification something they want all of their productions to aspire to. Now, we make that harder because the targets are getting harder and further away, so that's something that kind of comes with that, is the tension there. But in terms of the editorial, I suppose, or even the emissions from your content, is that a role for Ofcom, Kira?
Well, I think this is something we've been looking at, and currently environmental isn't part of our duties at the moment, though we've been doing some forward planning just in case, just because we can see with the net zero target. So currently it's not part of our duties, so we're not specifically able to require broadcasters to do things. But when we're assessing content and what's social value, there can be a difference between what we require and what we can also give credit for. And, you know, so social value is an area we've been looking into. So what is social value? What is public value? And that's something where, you know, it's a matter of, you know, for ongoing internal work.
And I know from my own conversations with your teams that it's forming an element of your review on the purpose of public broadcasting, this small screen, big debate agenda as well, which is
Sure.
fantastic and really refreshing. Okay, we have got 3 minutes left, and I think that the best thing for us to do is just to close off and allow you all to make a kind of final comment, really, in that last 3 minutes. We've got so many questions. I've really tried my best to weave as many of them in as we can. For those of you who are familiar with Albert, that's brilliant. You know that we've got a huge amount of resources. Please do go onto our website and have a look at what we've got there. We've got case studies, we've got information. There's a resource called Planet Placement that helps people understand how they can put these messages into their content. And obviously certification and calculation, if you're making content, then you can measure the impacts of your activities. So let's go in the order that you spoke. Catherine, any kind of parting comments or one takeaway for our attendees?
Yeah, so I think I would say, you know, we've heard a lot about climate change over the last 10-15 years, and it's absolutely now is the time that everyone needs to be acting on this and working together. So all stakeholders, all levels of every organisation need to be keeping this in mind.
Thank you very much. Kira?
Yeah, so I'd just like to echo that and to say, you know, this really is a, you know, getting to net zero is a responsibility for everyone, and it really encompasses frankly everything that we do. Is that how can we make this more sustainable?
Fantastic. Richard?
Thanks. Because I was up against time, I didn't refer to much evidence on the sort of impact of, or the power of broadcasting and content to influence, but someone's put a great comment in the chat about the designated drivers campaign, which Cheers the Show had an amazing success with. That was a really concerted effort. I think that's a great example. It can also be done in much more subtle ways, and it can also have a negative impact. So in a sense, thinking about how to move away from not a positive impact to a positive impact. I came across an example of Robert Altman's The Player film, which apparently was responsible for a huge uptick in buying of Range Rovers, sort of as a counterexample. But as a general point, and kind of go back to the middle class lifestyle question, I think in the past, my sense is that content is concentrated on green lifestyles as either tiny little things you can do, like, you know, changing your light bulbs or half filling the kettle, or it's been shows about really extreme lifestyles that would never scale up to the mass population. I think there's a huge space there that content could try and move into, which is behavior change that is acceptable and can scale up for lots of people.
Yeah, normative action, isn't it? Right, we are at 11:30. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for the couple of people that I didn't quite get to your questions. The comments coming through around it's excellent, inspiring conversation. Thank you. So thank you to all of you, and thank you to Siobhan, who is here under the name BAFTA Webinar, because she has made this run absolutely perfectly and smoothly. So thanks to everyone that participated, everyone that attended, and we hope to see you at another event at some stage in the future.